Started here. Okay.
Okay, we can get started. Welcome to Dacheng building. This is the first time we had a meeting over here. So congratulations, you got here on the Shale Hills. So these are the announcements I have. The data call is now open every spring. We ask people to upload their data. This is particularly important this year because we expect to get an RFP at any time from NSF, and we'll be writing a proposal so you have to have everything online. The timber salvage operation is going to take place in the catchment to the north of Shale Hills, and Jason Kay has been working really hard with Joe Harding's group to make sure that the way it gets done. And Brandon has been working even harder than Jason, I should say, because you haven't talked to Joe many times. But anyway, that's sort of under conversation. I think it's going to go in a direction that we're happy about.
When we left the meeting, they were going to drag the logs down the road that goes from the tower down. When we left the meeting, they were looking for an alternative, and have they updated you on the alternative?
They did not, other than Brandon did Brent Harding out there, and Kevin Cook did say that he wouldn't have a problem with that.
Okay.
But it won't be until probably like July if Kevin has hooked up.
We want Kevin to do it.
Kevin we want Kevin.
Kevin's a known entity. He's good, so we should.
Yeah, what they were going to do kind of made Jason have pause, so we reopened up the conversation so that we can try to get a little bit better control over it. And thank you for doing that. And Brandon, you've been talking to these guys for a long time, so we appreciate that. Okay, so I was funded with my husband, Andy, to do a 3D seismic survey in Shale Hills. This is from Department of Energy, my stuff. And it's going to be a very densely spaced survey over the whole thing. And we're going to need volunteers to help, so we'll have details to come on that. It'll be in June. It could be the most extremely close spacing of any survey ever. To be able to see everything in there, including the things that some people keep dropping down the holes. Okay, there's going to be a new entrance to Shavers Creek from Charter Oak coming soon, and Brandon's going to tell you about that.
So they're at Charter Oak Road. Sometime.
Is it going to be the one where you can only come in the other way?
Right. Yeah, where you make that left. Well, they're going to actually, sometime this summer, they're going to, that road's going to get closed, and they're going to put a new road in, a whole new road coming in off of, basically up over the hill from that, and it'll block the Charter Oak in. And then, so the only way, once they start that, the only way that you'll be able to get into Shale Hills is off of 26 and come in on the dirt road on Red Rose.
Red Rose. Okay. All right, so we'll send out more info about that too.
I was actually there this morning. The road is closed right now for flooding.
Yeah, that's why the road has been closed, and I'm guessing, looking at the bridge right there by that cabin, it got washed out pretty bad, so it might be closed indefinitely anyway. So
you can come in from Red Rose.
You still can come in from Red Rose. I don't know that hours. So
there's still water over the road.
There's still blocked at the upstream side of the culverts. That whole yard and everything was.
I don't know what the meteorologists are doing with the weather, but you guys got to get on it. Come on.
This is what you asked for.
A big thaw in February.
This is climate change. Get used to it.
Field safety. You have something to say about field
so
safety?
yeah, just the field safety, just typical spring stuff coming up. There are ticks out. Bunch of them off me yesterday already, so just watch for the ticks. And there are bears. There's been bears at the farm as well, so just keep an eye out there. And if you do come across any of these streams that are flooded across the roads, just make sure you do not drive through the stream. Just in general, you don't know what's under there.
That's really important. Don't drive through a stream that's going across the road. That's how people will drown. Maybe have people here that don't have any driven in those conditions sometimes. Okay, May 10 and 11 is all hands. As you know, this is where everybody gets together, everybody is presenting. It's May 10 and 11, I think I already said that. We invited Jane Fun from Rutgers. And that was, we polled, I think all the PIs or at least many of them. I was just talking to her this weekend. She's just written a really interesting paper, a review paper on depth of roots in the critical zone. And receiving the National Academy. It's a very pertinent paper to some of the things we're thinking about. So I think she'll be here, and I think that would be really nice. Because she's also written a paper on the global levels of groundwater, depth to groundwater globally. She's an interesting paper. Our next seminar is March 30th at 3:30, and that'll be over in EES building. Okay. Does anybody else have a announcement? Okay. So the topic today is a little bit free form. It's about scaling up. And just to remind you, this was one of the things that we said we were going to do for this round of funding. And this round of funding is terminating at the end of September, which doesn't mean the money has terminated, but that was the 5-year time frame. You can always save money for your students to keep them funded beyond the end. So we have money to fund some students. But at any rate, we were supposed to, by the end of September, be putting on the table a model showing how we were going to scale up from Shale Hills to all of Shavers Creek. And so this conversation today is about the thoughts and where we are in that process. Because when we write our renewal, we're going to have to show, what we've done. And hopefully we'll sort of make some progress. So, go ahead. Okay? All right, so who's going first? Is it Dacheng? Thanks. Do you know how long we have this room for?
Exactly 1:30, the next group starts.
To 1:30?
Okay, hello everyone, I'm Dacheng. Today I'm gonna talk about our work of comparing two monolithological watersheds, the Shale Hills and Ghana Run, towards better understanding the upscaling problems and understanding the hydrological processes. We compared the Shale Hills and Ghana Run. They are monolithological watersheds, and they have the similar climate, the similar land cover, and none of them has upstream coming in. So the major difference between them is related to the lithology and topography.
Excuse me for stopping you. Let me just make sure I know who's going to talk besides Dacheng. You're going to talk? Is it just the two of you? Callum, are you talking about? Because I kept wanting you to talk about some scaling up ideas. You don't have anything to say about what you're thinking about? I thought I kept writing people. Why don't you make sure that somewhere during the thing you can talk a little bit about what you've been thinking about, not that you have to give it. Sure. Anybody else who thinks that they want to? Okay, so I just wanted to make sure we had enough time for everybody. He's right here.
Yeah.
Are you going to say anything in this? Do you have some slides?
Yes. Yes, I think they're up. They're up.
Okay, so we have 3 people. I just wanted to make sure that we keep it within the 1.5 hour time frame, and everybody else just helps me do that too, in case I get too excited about something and I don't go fast. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, we got similar other conditions except expected the lithology and the topography. Compared to the Shale Hills, actually, Ghana Run has larger porosity, the smaller persistence of the soil, and larger conductivity of the soil. And from the topography perspective, the Ghana Run has smaller slope and has radically larger riparian zone ratio. And actually, the lithology and topography are dependent factors in the reality world. So it is hard to separately figure out these two factors based on the data. So we're trying to use the model from the model perspective to answer the question of what is the relative strength of soil properties and topography, and also try to use this to help us understand how to improve the upscaling problem and predicting the ungauged basin from these two monolithological watershed comparison. And the major tool we use is Upscaling. It is a fifth-based spatial distributed land surface and hydrological model. It actually can use to simulate the interception, the infiltrate, the surface runoff, the vertical flow in unsaturated zone, the horizontal flow in saturated zone, and the recharge between them, the soil moisture distribution at different soil depths, and also the evapotranspiration, the river channel process. And the data used to set up the model, including the surface elevation, the balance depths, the soil map, vegetation map, watershed boundary, and portion data. And we can use the hydrological monitoring data like discharge, soil moisture, water table depths to calibrate the model. And in our work, we want to take best benefits from what we have learned at the Shale Hills. So we gradually tested the transferability from Shale Hills to Ghana Run. At the first step, we actually used the mentioned data from the national data sets and directly transform the model calibration information from Shale Hills to Ghana Run, as shown in the light blue solid line. It shows that these results, actually the transferability cannot reproduce the large flow peak and the discharge at the dry condition. And we noticed that there is a difference between the national data sites, soil data sites we use, say the circle, and the Shale Hills field measurements. There will be a scale factor between these prior soil parameters. So we use that to modify the prior soil map in the Ghana Run from the circle data sites, and then get a new transferability results shown in the light blue dashed line. And we can see basically the discharge prediction gets improved. However, under the dry condition, the discharge still cannot be captured well. We found that the the Ghana Run actually has larger friction of surface peak border compared to Shale Hills, or Shale Hills has no surface border. And we then adding that surface border information into the system and changing the map of core in order to capture that the fact that we have some surface border. And with showing in that dark blue dashed line, we noticed the prediction, actually the discharge prediction under the dry condition get proved. Lots of small peaks can be captured. And however, if we look at the high time resolution, the daily one, the high resolution, time resolution, actually the discharge is not satisfactory.
Are those parameters, I see that you're multiplying parameters.
Yeah.
Are those the same multiplications of parameters that were used for Shale Hills, or are these different? Would you use the Shale Hill parameter values in Ghana Run? Or maybe you'll get.
That is the first case. Yeah, we directly use that multiplier.
So the answer is no. The parameters for Ghana Run do not work.
Do not work.
So that's a serious test of upscaling.
Wait, I'm not sure I understand yet. What is direct? What does it mean? It says direct.
Direct means actually in our transferability, we actually consider transfer the parameter from one watershed to another one.
So you kept all the parameters the same from Shale Hills and just applied it to Ghana.
We have two parts. One is our prior soil parameters coming from the data science. For example, from circle, there is a prior map with different soil parameters, and we have a multiplier multiplied by that map and get the final parameters. So what we keep is the multiplier, the global calibration value of that constant from the database, from what we get from Shale Hills.
So direct.
It means
Change
that-
anything?
It means that if we, for example, if we want to run the model well at Shale Hills, we may need to
I want
multiply.
to know what each of the different things is. What is direct? What does that mean?
So at Shale Hills, if we need to multiply horizontal hydraulic connectivity by 2, then we do the same for Ghana Run.
That is.
And that's what we do for direct.
So for the same soil types, have the same parameter values.
But aren't there different soil types in?
Yes,
garden?
but we use one global calibration coefficient, which means that applies to multiple soil types.
So in the Garner, in the Shale Hills work, you have one multiplier.
So in general, the parameter value is different, but we keep the multiplier same. That is what comes from direct.
Where did the different parameters come from?
From the data set. There you go.
So
Direct
the
is
Ghana has its
field
own
measurements.
soil
Yeah.
type and related property from the database.
From survey.
Yeah, we cannot use, from Circle, we cannot directly use all these parameters from Shale Hills because they are different soil types or different.
Well, it's okay, I'm just trying to understand what you did. Okay,
Yeah.
so you went to Surgo and you figured out the soil types, and then you got the parameters for each soil type.
Mhm.
And that's not direct. You then tweaked it in the same way that you had to tweak the Shale Hill one.
Yes,
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's what direct is.
yes.
You get all the parameters from Surgo, and you have this multiplier, which was the same multiplier you used in Shale Hills. And that's what you mean by direct.
Yes. And one important point here is actually for this direct test case, the sources for the A prior data are different. Because in Shale Hills, we're not using circle data, we're using field measurements. Then we
And
Right,
in Garden
yeah.
Run, you use Surgo.
circle, right? So the
Yeah, and
sources
that
of
is the
the
second
data
case.
are different.
Yeah.
Then
I
we
would
think,
put all of these things on the slide here, because this is like, to really unpack this, there's no way to do this
Yes,
unless you
the
write it
three
all.
cases direct, and then second rescale is the one like once after you scale the
Based
field
on the
measurement
source
with.
results.
Okay, I don't understand that either.
so the rescaled part is there is error in circle data. So first we try to fix the error in circle data by rescale them to the same level as the field data. Then we apply the multiplier to that. So we try to fix the error in circle first.
Is that just topographically or something, you're just looking at the maps?
And no, we just compare the
Parameter comes
field.
from different sources.
So we have field measurements from Shale Hills and circle data from Shale Hills. Then we can see that maybe the conductivity is 2 times in the field measurements than in the circle data. Then we say, hey, maybe circle underestimates hydraulic conductivity. Then we do the same thing to Garner Run to fix that first. And then we apply the multiplier.
That's related to my questions. Are there any measurements of soil documents on the run that you're using?
No.
No.
No. All coming from measurement.
Just relying on certain and shale.
Well, you do have the certificates that have a map from China. That's a debate.
Yes. Yes.
So that's a certificate.
Yeah, that is the third case. I mean, for the second case, we're talking about the soil from circle from the field. For Ghana Run, we have no information coming from the soil properties. I mean, the field soil properties. The third case, we adding the surface big order information into the soil.
We could compute soil physical properties too, though. Possibly.
Computing.
That's what Tess was saying we were gonna do.
Solve the density values.
Right. Yes.
Could be done.
Could. Yes.
So it's like if you have field measurement. We don't have field measurement.
No, Tess said that we would be able to do this, and I was
I
like,
don't think it's
Didn't say it. I don't know if it's done, but I think we have the data.
He
for.
was saying you could get it from soil moisture sensors. So,
We also need the water retention. I think that part is missing.
I don't know if we need to, but that was kind of part of the design.
exactly, I remember this too. That we were gonna.
Yeah, so that's a labor. Calculation.
Well, that's not calibration, that's field measurements of the soil.
We do have measurement in the field.
But from from measurements that we have,
It's part of, what do you really need to upscale?
do you know what he's talking about? And we do have the data to do this, right?
What data?
It's not direct, it's indirect. It's like you have the end product and then you fit the parameter.
So it's like an inverse model. It's like an inverse model.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
It's like using the model to
This, so the data you need something else in addition to soil moisture data? Because we are already.
Tell me.
So test, this idea was to just use soil moisture data to try to figure out the measurement parameters. So you fit different measurement parameters into the model, see which one is the best.
So that's what Dacheng has already done.
That is from the
Not really, because we are still working with the model, but test's idea was to just look at the data. We use the simplest, the simplest
local soil.
Richard's
Like
equation.
1 point.
Yes.
Yeah, Richard's equations, and then check which parameters fit the best the soil moisture parameter.
It's important because when this was done in Shale Hills, with the CZO, not very similar to what you measured.
So actually, our findings without any measurements, that's transferability is not satisfactory, and adding the surface border could improve some prediction, especially for these two models of different lithology watersheds, and which means we actually failed that transferability in transferability, and then we calibrate the model using the uncertainty-based method, and we set up different cases, one with the without the border, another one with the border, and we use the multi-objective, say the different statistics to constrain the stream discharge and the aerial average, the soil moisture data, and the results here shows that the calibrated model actually has a satisfactory performance. However, different cases, with and without the border, actually get us equifinality results, which means if we have the gauge data and want to calibrate the model, then maybe the surface bit border is not necessary.
So you're not showing us what's different. What's different are the parameters.
No, not here. Yeah, no. But I have that.
But what's different between the two? Is it parameter values that are different?
Yeah, one has border, another one is without border.
But do they have the same parameter values also?
No.
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to figure out. So you tuned to find different parameters, and then
Yeah.
you can make it fit.
Yes.
So you can beat the model,
Yes. Exactly.
even if you have bad input.
Thank goodness.
Do you have that figure that shows
Uh,
to run like range voltage?
the curve.
Those are values.
Yeah, I have that. Yeah. Basically, this red cross is what in the Shale Hills. The parameters related to velocity, runtime, alpha beta, and some macro-correlated parameters like the depth and macro-connectivity in different directions. And those two is the with and without border case. We can see actually for the matrix parameters, the velocity, runtime, alpha, and beta, the difference is not significant. But for the macro-correlated thing, it has some difference. But generally, if we just look at the matrix, there's no. Compared to Shale Hills, the Ghana run has larger velocity and the larger fundamental beta, which means it has smaller persistence, the lower water return.
Do you believe your uncertainty values?
Sorry. I would say yes. I did the logging hypercube sampling method and more than 600 runs, and I use that relatively high statistics for multi objective, say the NSE number, the P belts, the partial belts, and also the Riemann square error versus the standard deviation, and all of them is satisfactory in those range.
That's both soil moisture and history.
Yes.
I think that might be parameter interaction, right? So it's not totally free in that range.
Yeah.
It's bounded by the values of the other parameters.
Yeah.
So these are range is like around 20 runs that are the 500 that actually reproduce.
Yeah.
So it's actually a small proportion.
Mhm.
So, Patrick, can I ask a clarification? So these parameters just show, are those inversely obtained? The particular macro domain.
You mean?
Yes, that's the
So those
calibration
are
result.
okay. So therefore, I wonder, the model does it have the capacity to handle the two domains, macropores and matrix?
No.
So how can you design the macropore?
So the macropore just increases the hydraulic connectivity of the matrix part. So it's not a true domain, true porosity.
Yes.
Yes.
There is the integrated connectivity based on the metrics.
You do have volume fraction. So it's not like spatially explicit and put in macro, but you do have that occupancy in the total volume.
Yeah.
It's not spatial, like so here is the microphone, here's the.
So back to this thing about fitting the soil moisture data for places. Could you fit those parameters? No,
No.
I guess you were calculating the Van Newton parameters.
Right. That's
those,
the matrix.
Those two. Yes.
Those
and
are-
the process.
Right. So the first three is like you can.
Yeah.
Yes.
If we have the pressure.
No, we can just fit the Richards equation
Oh yeah.
For the local number, not
for the local numbers. Yes.
But isn't that what, in essence, isn't that what happened in Shale Hills? You got local numbers.
Right.
So to do something in parallel to what we did in Shale Hills, we should probably do that.
Right. At Shale Hills, we have 50-something sites, and God collected the data from 50-something sites and divide them into different groups according to soil types and average them by soil types, and we get the numbers for each soil type.
And then in Gardner Run, we have 4 soils with soil moisture data. And our experiment implicitly was hypothesizing that with those 4 sites, we could do this, right? And I think we do have to try that. That's right. I mean, if it's, well, exactly, but sometimes it helps to try to remember what you're doing.
No, I understand. That's why I was asking.
It's the old together, once you remember what you're doing.
Those, just tell me about the parameters. Those are, that's a multiplier for the watershed. And normalized.
Okay, so we then actually apply the hybrid model at 2 sites using the same meteorological forcing and try to say, okay, what will be the variables, the variable, what will be the flux, what will be the mechanism behind that. This is the simulated discharge at 2 sites. The red is Shale Hills and blue is Gardner Run. We noticed a larger discharge of precipitation ratio in Shale Hills, which is surprising because we actually previously we noticed Gardner Run has higher connectivity, smaller water retention capacity. Why it has smaller discharge here? If we look at the discharge components, say the stream discharge, the subsurface lateral flow, and the surface runoff, we will say the Shale Hills actually has a larger fluctuation. And if we look at the surface runoff, the Shale Hills also have larger surface runoff, which means the Gardner Run has more infiltrated water. And we try to analyze that mechanism, get the mechanism behind this phenomenon, this results. So we use the discharge and storage relationship to analyze the discharge sensitivity. In this figure, actually, one is in the linear axis, another one is log linear axis. Again, the red is Shale Hills, the blue is Ghana Run, and actually the slope of this curve has some basic meaning. If based on the simplified mathematical derivation, people found that the local slope of this figure, which means the dq over ds, has some basic means. It will positively related to the slope, which is the m, the slope of the watershed, and the conductivity, and inversely related to the porosity. And at different storage condition, these parameters of conductivity and porosity will be increased or decreased based on the storage change. And from this result, we can say the Shale Hills has a larger sensitivity, discharge sensitivity. It could be caused by the larger slope in Shale Hills, or could be caused by the larger ratio of conductivity over porosity. And say different, because the slope, if we think it has a constant, at different storage, this ratio will be different. We also notice that from the connectivity perspective, the Shale Hills has a larger fluctuation, which means it could be the Ghana Run's porosity, which stores more water to buffer the fluctuation, or the riparian zone for the smaller slope in Ghana Run buffers that water change.
This is cool. I have a question. Could it be in either place that water is escaping? It's not escaping. Water is sneaking out.
Definitely going out deeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Because then this is all.
The QL representing the water, the summation of the shadow, and if it goes into stream.
I know, what are those three terms that you went through really fast in the beginning? QD, QL.
QD, QL, QS. This is stream discharge.
Yeah.
And the top is what? And this is subsurface lateral flow. The horizontal flow is subsurface. And this is the surface runoff.
Don't have measurements.
But anything down to groundwater is ignored. Like,
So QL is essentially combined.
Yeah, we are.
Like, so two.
QL is.
So we are understand that flow is here, this invisible because we don't have separate groundwater.
Yeah, we assume it is in control.
And your point was, if you're losing water in the groundwater.
And if you're not going to have a measurement of it, it could be a problem for the whole simulation. But QL should be a guess at that, right? We just don't know if it's
No,
correct.
not really.
Well, it is a lateral flow, subsurface. It could be garbage.
No, but you're talking about loss
It is combined.
out the watershed.
Does QL have a thing to it? Oh, it all stays in the watershed.
Like you're essentially doing a mass balance.
Yeah.
And if it's not leaving the stream, I mean, if it's not in the stream, but it's leaving the watershed, then your mass balance isn't going to work.
So QL is base flow, so it goes into the stream by going through the soil. And as QS is the surface flow, it comes from the land surface.
But neither one of those exits the ocean.
So you essentially assume that those two flows have to equal what goes out in the
Yeah.
stream.
Right, yes.
Okay.
And there's a lot of water going out in the subsurface in both watersheds.
So the water that goes into deeper subsurface will be much smaller proportions than that. If you consider the turbidity content, you wouldn't have large amount of water goes this direction.
Well, when you stand in Garner Run, you can hear the water flowing in the subsurface.
That's taking into account that.
I don't understand how that comes leaving the watershed.
Leaving the watershed.
Leaving
No, leaving the watershed or
All QD.
It should be added to Q.
yes.
Yes.
QD is underestimated because there's a lot leaving there.
Oh, you mean going not from the exit?
No, from the exit, in the underground, on the exit.
So you can also, you can measure that directly from the district. And on the ground district. Just stores that.
Right. So you are saying they don't enter the stream? They
But
go
they
in all
Well,
the way.
on the ground.
Yeah.
The stream is just the upper, level
Yeah, yeah. I see.
of a groundwater river.
Yeah.
Until you have measurement then. So no way we can, the model is as good as.
You don't need no, the models keep tuned to the measurement of discharge.
Yeah,
Especially
yeah.
if the discharge is wrong, they're always tuning it.
Web transfer, yeah, I have that. For this simulated run, the Shale Hills has around 48, and the Ghana run has around 65.
So the reason I started thinking about that is maybe it's because Garner Run has more discharge in the ground.
So which means,
And taught us that, Sean, is this.
I say,
So actually, Bryce has measurements.
Yeah, I think we could estimate the loss
Yeah, how much?
underground. I don't know that we can constrain it, but I think we could estimate it.
Mine is similar though, it's just based on mass balance, even too, but it's still assuming the stream flow as a primary.
this is definitely less than greater than.
So you're saying that ET is different in the two watersheds?
Yeah, yes, I've seen that. The Ghana run has more. Maybe that's where God is sitting. That's something.
Did you measure?
Two weeks. We could compare that 2 week data to compare around to Shale Hills.
Could you assume that ET is the same between these two and then calculate the variable loss or something like that?
We have leak here. Such as.
That's actually,
We do have an estimation, like estimation with LAI from the database.
what we are using here.
Yeah.
I understand, so I don't think this is not an uninformed.
One of our hypotheses, the more stored water in the return zone of the run actually provides more chance. So this is why we can find more utility.
So can we use the well data? So there's methods that were developed back in the 30s to look at the diurnal amplitudes of groundwater tables, and you try to crosswalk that to evapotranspirational demand. You got to account for differences in soil texture and other properties, but using empirical data, we might be able to constrain that as well. I haven't looked at that, but I'd be happy to take a look.
Yeah, I think there's things we could do to try to constrain it, but maybe chemical mass balance.
And then I know we've chatted about this, Dacheng, but like to what degree does the valley fill reality versus valley fill model, do you think, play a difference in some of the water trends that you see? Like, do you feel as though your model right now accurately captures reality, just because we know that like that valley fill is like 15 meters of sand, and that's like not in this model.
I won't say the model can capture the reality. That's I'd say in our case, we use the model as a tool to test the sensitivity of different parts, especially has a relative strength between the lithology, the soil properties, and the topography. That is what I'm going to show later. But I'd say basically the comparing two watersheds, I'm thinking the relatively relationship could be captured by the model.
If there was just some way to like do like like we used to be doing, right? Just like set bedrock depth different and like see how that changes. And so maybe you could artificially alter bedrock depths to learn about how and more volume valley fill affects those outputs. Maybe make it better.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can do that.
And this is not, I don't think it's just a model of numbers, because we have
Careful.
We have measurements. We know how much precipitation there is for each watershed. We know how much water is leaving the watershed. So it's not just the model numbers. We have measured numbers too.
This is fitting to how you upscale, so you have your best fit for each watershed.
Yeah.
So this is like the analysis problem. So I don't care if I can upscale, I have to describe which watershed is tested.
Right.
So the only error here is the loss as groundwater. Or not the only error, but that is still.
For those numbers, I don't know whether we could say that is a source of error because we actually measure QD, we also measure P. So I think the measured numbers must be very close to those two numbers because we calibrated the model to QD. So I don't think they could be much wrong. Now we don't know. Right. From this analysis, the only thing that could be very wrong is actually evapotranspiration. Right.
That's where the mass balance comes in. Right?
Yes.
Yes.
But I mean, in the sandstone, have there been, so I know there's been a lot of tracer tests, dilution gauging measurements at Shale Hills. Have there been similar measurements to look at gauge undercatch? Is there a systematic bias in the stream flow measurements at Garner Run? Anybody know?
We have done tracers in the industry.
So, and those were more short-term scales.
Yeah, that's really.
So basically, there's other ways that you could try to get empirical data to look at if what we're measuring for discharge is biased to be small, if there's bypass through the outside of the hyporheic zone, or a little bit deeper. Look at mass recovery and integrate under the curve.
We
And
haven't
that's
done
it.
that in Shale Hills.
Sorry.
I mean, I know Henry did a little bit of tracer testing, and then
Sorry, I've only got one processor, maybe half one right now.
I saw you had that injection, like tracer injection experiment, and did you look at the mass balance? In terms of
Yeah,
how
I
you-
guess that's my question. Are you just looking at the loss of tracer that you're not measuring downstream as that would be your deeper QED?
So it means you got to disentangle that from dead storage or
Yeah.
hyporheic zone storage in some way, shape, or form. But there's been lots of analyses looking at if you do that longer term and not just over shorter reaches, but longer reaches under different flow conditions, you can better quantify that. But at least to try to get at some ballpark estimate of separating out what that dead storage is that's still in the stream and ultimately will make its way out past the gauge that we're measuring versus how many flow paths are bypassing that surface water flow that we're measuring as discharge. So are not the model error, but the actual empirical data, is it slightly biased?
to be fair, we've always ignored the groundwater loss before today, and now we're talking about this. But it's partly because Garner Run, you can stand there and hear it in the subsurface.
Yeah.
So we have to at least acknowledge that it's there, and then go through some process of thinking about what it might mean for the model.
So that's, you were saying is that the mass is balanced.
No,
It's not, there is loss of tracer or storage.
I feel like how much?
But it's accounted for in the model we use for the hyporheic zone, but not really for
Like how much?
like 10% or something, isn't it?
Yeah.
10%.
It's not higher than, I don't think it'd be higher.
But that was loss of the sodium. I'm not sure that's exactly the same thing that we're asking, but
It's kind of changeable.
exactly, it's a little bit different what she was
I don't
saying.
know how to parse that out.
We better keep going here then.
Okay. Yeah, then in order to separately figure out the lithogen topography influence, we set up 4 cases by switching the soil properties and topography. In the label here means the Shale Hills topography, Shale Hills soil, and this is Shale Hills topography, Garner Run soil. And from the left column to right, we can see the discharge actually increases by 50%. And from the topography of Garner Run to the topography of Shale Hills, the discharge increases about 70%. Just from this result, we think the topography has more influence on the discharge, and we hypothesize that the gonna run soil due to the high conductivity and low persistence, it will generate more discharge. And because of the larger slope and narrow riparian zone, the Shale Hills topography will have more discharge compared to the gonna run. And if we look at this discharge and storage relationship between for each case, we will say, let's say the red color means Shale Hills topography, blue one is a gonna run topography. Under wet condition, actually changing the soil has smaller difference, but for the gonna run one, changing that will have more difference. We think this is because the Shale Hills topography actually allows the water go faster, and for the wet condition, that topography will be a first control. If the topography is limited, the gonna runs, the soil of gonna run or Shale Hills won't change the wet condition discharge much. However, if we look at the dry condition, this pink one is using the gonna run soil. As under the dry condition, the soil doesn't matter. It will increase the sensitivity. For example, if we use gonna run soil, the discharge sensitivity will increase. This is one.
So when we go back to the 4, I think everyone needs to get what you did first.
Okay. Just worry all the time.
Yeah, no, I think we're basically doing a sensitivity test.
Yeah, yes,
And
it
the
is.
topography is more important than the soil parameter. I
Yeah.
got that.
Yeah,
A lot of other stuff I'm not getting, but I got this.
especially for the wet condition.
He's trying to understand why the two watersheds
Yeah,
are
how
different.
does the
chronologically.
soil property add topography?
To me, that seems like a really important thing to scale it up.
Yes,
Go
yes,
across many watersheds. It sounds like topography is really.
yes. Yes.
We know it's possible.
Yeah, we can get it from the.
But I mean, to first order then, we could scale up by going to the other sub-watersheds and just look at the topographic map, which is a whole lot easier than doing all this big and stuff
Yeah.
that have to do.
Yeah.
You just ignore the soil.
Yeah, especially.
I didn't say that.
Jason loves that.
That's why I said, why are you doing that? So we can know the soil now, thank you.
For some cases. However, if we consider topography like gonna run with the small slope and relatively larger riparian zone ratio, we cannot ignore the slope. And this is the connectivity for each case. Again, if we add the Shale Hills topography, changing the soil won't change the connectivity too much. And if we consider the gonna run topography, basically, if we look at the case 2 and 4, the same soil but different topography, we can see the increase by the topography of gonna run. However, if you remember that the gonna run case, the case 4 has smaller discharge, which means the larger connectivity caused by the topography may leading to smaller discharge. Well, this could be caused by the smaller elevation gradients at the riparian zone and the small slope. And if we look at the case 3 and 4, the increased connectivity due to the gonna run, the soil difference actually increased the discharge, which means from the soil perspective, the larger porosity has the potential to increase the connectivity and generate more flow paths, which also helps to get a larger discharge. Our conclusion is the connectivity controlled by different, the soil and topography lead to opposite water balance behavior. And again, if we do a summary, we think that for some upland landscape has larger slope the topography is the most important thing when we do the upscaling problem. And for the plain or the hill with larger parent zone and the floodplain, we think the soil properties are very important. This is what we get from this. Thanks.
So when you're in Switzerland, all you have to do is worry about the topography, but when you're in the Netherlands, you gotta worry about stuff.
Okay.
Okay, please comment.
While he's setting up, you just, Switzerland and the Netherlands are just two influences. I mean, is there something fundamental here that you can learn about land topography, like threshold, or is there some fundamental knowledge here, or is it just these case studies?
To me, I think it is a trade-off of the influence caused by the topography and the soil. If the topography has a strong enough influence. Has a strong enough influence, which means the soil influence could be ignored, and that means the relative strength of topography counts.
I'm just wondering if you can find these relationships across all topography and soil space, and forget about our two sites, and there's no sense of that across all topography and soil space.
Potentially, like if you run like other pneumatic experiments to explore these areas, and look at QS relationship, like what is mapping out where this is one point, so it could be more.
Yeah, it would be like a global environmental space.
There are two here, this guy and this
Are you asking him, can you do this from his studies? Like, how would you ask him?
There's another one.
Close that one.
What's your board?
Doesn't have to be
All right, let's go. We're getting it here. Is it this one here? Is it this one here?
So Han is actually on another project. He just so it really just like present the idea, get feedback.
So, and we are gonna get kicked out of here at 1:30. They even want us to leave before that, but I'm not. But we are gonna have to leave at 1:30.000.
Yeah, okay, go fast. So this is this model is still at a very initial stage, because I just work on this last month. So we are trying to use some simple model to understand hydrogeochemical process at watershed scale. So we all know that the process-based model is a very powerful tool for us to understand the hydrological and geochemical interactions at watershed scale. However, it requires numbers of parameters for us as an input in those complex models like artifacts PIN, and it requires a lot of labor, money, and time to collect those data. However, compared to the complex model, the simple model, maybe you can just use 1 box, 2 boxes, or even 3 boxes to based on mass balance equations to figure out which parameter is the key parameter, which process is the critical one for us to capture the watershed dynamics. Another question usually for us to build up these simple models is to test the limits of the simple model or its capacity. If we can to use this simple model to capture the dynamics at large scales. Because these simple models are easy to use and requires much less inputs, I think it can be might be easier for us to understand or explore what are the general principles across different CZO sites. Actually, we can use what we have learned from the complex model to build up the simple model. For example, what we learned from artifacts PIN in the Shale Hills is the water partitioning. drives the slow export. For example, if we have the soil minerals have very high surface area, that means the soil minerals like chloride, which dissolve out magnesium, will be the major source for the magnesium in the discharge. This means the soil, the lateral flow in the soil will be the primary magnesium in the discharge, leading to chemostatic behavior. If we have very small surface area, this means the mineral or soil minerals dissolve very slow. Then the primary magnesium source will be the constant groundwater flow that is not responsive to the hydrological conditions. That will lead to a more dilute behavior. That is, if we have more discharge, the concentration will decreasing. So that's why we build up a two-box model. So these two boxes are used to simulate the water partitioning in different layers. Here we use the top box that is used to represent the soil layer, which is compact and less and more responding and fast responding to hydrological conditions. And that bottom box is meant to represent the groundwater layer, which includes the aquifer and also the parallel materials underlying in the highly fractured bedrock. And there could be an interaction between the top box and bottom box through the leakage and the discharge. And in this model, we use precipitation, evapotranspiration, and stream discharge as the input. So first, let's see how the model can solve the water part. Basically, the governing law is the water balance, that is mass balance. For example, in the top box, we have precipitation as the water source. Well, then it lost water through the evapotranspiration and also the leakage. So we can get a water balance equation from this mass balance. So the storage, the changes of water storage in the top layer with time actually is a function of the precipitation and leakage and evapotranspiration. Well, the leakage can also be modeled through the nonlinear discharge storage relationship just like Dacheng mentioned. So like here shows this the power law equation. This people use a lot in the literature to describe the relationship between the discharge and storage. And then by introducing a new ratio, this is the theta here, we can know how much water will flow vertically into the groundwater and how much will flow laterally into the stream. And then similarly for the bottom box that represents the groundwater layer, we have discharge. It is fed by the discharge from the top shallow layer. Well, the only output is the groundwater discharge because the evapotranspiration is can be neglected for this bottom for the deep groundwater layer. So similarly, we can also get a mass balance equations like the changes of the storage in the groundwater layer is a difference between the recharge and the groundwater discharge. And then we can also simulate the groundwater discharge through the nonlinear relationship between the discharge and the storage, like this power law equation. And after that, by combining these equations, we can also get the total stream discharge from the sum of the storage from the lateral flow and the groundwater flow. So then we can like use mathematically coding or whatever. We can get how much water in the topsoil layer and how much water in the groundwater layer. Then we can understand the water partitioning at the watershed scale. Then let's see how we can simulate the transport of no-reactive species like chloride, Cl. So for the Cl, the major source in Shale Hills is from the rainwater, from the precipitation. So the general idea is still based on mass balance equation. So we can see that the mass changes for the CL in the shallow layer actually is a function of precipitation and also the leakage, because we assume that in each box is well mixed. So the concentration draining into the out of the box actually is equal to the concentration within the box. That's why we only have 2 concentrations for each box. And similarly, we still use the mass balance equations solving the CL transport in the groundwater layer. So the difference in the groundwater layer is the difference between the recharge and the groundwater discharge. And the total CL concentration in the stream discharge is the sum from the lateral flow and groundwater flow. So by combining these equations, we can estimate the CL concentrations in different layers. We can even estimate the water transport time through these equations, but I didn't explicitly cover how we can calculate these times here. What's the interest to see here is actually this simple model can capture the reactive transport issues like magnesium, because different from the low reactive tracer CL, the major source for the magnesium in Shale Hills is from the chloride and lead dissolution. So this is the general gap reaction for this type of dissolution. So actually for this mass balance equations, we need a source, either term to represent how fast the magnesium can be dissolved out from those minerals. Actually, in our previous work, we found that actually the rate in the field scale can be estimated through the rates as a small k estimate at the lab scale, and also the AE, that the effective surface area, represents how much mineral is effectively dissolving. And while this AE can be estimated through the total surface area, and also the top A, that is how much time the water spends in the system, and also how much water spends in the reactive mineral zones that are affected by the spatial heterogeneity and domain length. And then we add these rates into the mass balance equations we have shown for the CL. So basically, the formal part are the same. We just add rates for each for the magnesium transport. So basically, the mass changes of magnesium in the shallow layer is a function of the precipitation, leakage, and also the source, like how much can dissolve out of the minerals into the solution. And similarly, for the bottom box, we can also get a similar equation like that. So the mass changes for the magnesium in the groundwater layer is a function of the discharge and this groundwater discharge and also the rates. And we can also get a mass balance from the stream discharge. That's the magnesium in the stream discharge coming from the lateral flow and also the groundwater flow. So by combining these equations, we can estimate the magnesium dynamics at watershed scale in different layers. We can also estimate how much time water spends in those reactive zones, like the top ADR. I think this can infer us that the spatial heterogeneity, because actually the flow passes in the deep groundwater actually is induced by spatial heterogeneity. That will determine how much time spent in those reactive zones. So that's what we use tau A to represent, tau ADR to represent. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
So you should think, are you assuming everything in the groundwater goes in the stream?
Yes, kind of, yeah.
So you might think about the fact,
Yes,
does it matter if you lose groundwater entirely as well?
yeah, in the deep groundwater.
I didn't entirely understand everything you're talking about here, but I like the idea. I think I basically understand.
So basically, based on the mass balance, like
Right,
we
right.
like conceptually consider the system into two boxes. The soil is one box and the groundwater is one box. Then we can have interactions between these boxes using some empirical equation. People already use a lot in the literature to directly build on those mathematical relationships.
We're gonna go on to Yiming.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead and ask him a question.
Yeah,
Why don't we get Yiming up here, get his slides going? Go ahead.
So how is this different than from Upscaling RT, which is it's not balanced? I mean, it is. So, and so I'm just
That's the
wondering.
one thing we always do.
Yeah. So, like, I just wondering, just quickly, like,
There's no groundwater in.
It's the RT part though, that, like the model that you're working on. How is it different from the model you're working
So for the RT vacuum, we have a lot of grid blocks to represent the whole watershed.
on? Oh, you just bought.
Yeah, so for this model, we have only two boxes. So each box.
It's not spatial.
No.
So the thing is that like, if you have larger scale, like people run the conventional water model, your whole watershed is one.
Okay.
How would you simulate that?
Right. So this will pair well with like biome HEC.
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
So we talked a lot about groundwater today, and what I'm going to talk is actually adding the representation of deep groundwater at Shale Hills. So we always introduce our to PIM. We always introduce our model, saying PIM is able to simulate the groundwater flow at Shale Hills, but actually we have different opinions on that. So what I'm doing here is actually to add a fractured bedrock layer to PIM to represent that deeper layer. We do have, let me see. Okay, we do have unsaturated. Does it work? No. Oh, because it reflects so well. Okay. So you do have unsaturated zone and saturated zone in the soil, but actually we call this groundwater at Shale Hills, but some people will call it transient saturated flow, something like that. It's not really groundwater flow. So we have a no flow boundary condition. That means no groundwater can go into deeper layer. It either goes out of the model domain through discharge or it evapotranspirates. So that's the question we asked a lot just now about the mass balance. And we are going to add another layer that is a fractured bedrock layer. And within this layer, we also have unsaturated zone and saturated zone. And here it will be real groundwater. And now, instead of a no flow boundary condition, we added bedrock infiltration. And then there is bedrock recharge, which means water could flow from the unsaturated bedrock zone to the saturated bedrock zone. And for the boundary conditions, we can add either the flux boundary conditions or the head boundary conditions to any model grid that you choose as a boundary to represent the flow in or out of the watershed. And now I'm not letting the water leaving the model domain through the bedrock. So the only way it leaves the watershed is it can connect with the transient groundwater and then goes out of the model domain through discharge. But if we can observe the boundary conditions near the outlet in different watersheds, then we can actually add that representation in the model. So to apply it to Shale Hills, this is a table of parameters we use for the bedrock zone. So we choose the most representative soil type, the white soil type at Shale Hills. And then we parameterize the bedrock zone according to this white soil type. So horizontal and vertical hydraulic conductivities are 1% of the matrix soil values. The saturated, this is the porosity is 1/10 of the matrix values. And this is the Van Newton parameters. So it defines how leaky the soil is. This is a figure showing the matrix water potential versus the saturation ratio. And you can see that this is the bedrock. And those are the 5 different soil types at Shale Hills. We can see the soil, the bedrock is much leakier than the soil, and that's what we
Did you
use.
just make those numbers up, or where did those numbers come from?
This is the numbers actually Van Newton suggested in his paper for fracs in the soil or in the bedrock. Yes. And boundary conditions. So this is Pam Sullivan's paper in 2016, and this is what she described for the watershed, and we apply the boundary condition. The lower boundary condition is at about 250 meters in the model. So that it will be the new no flux boundary condition. And we apply the direct lake boundary condition at this model grade. And we set the groundwater level, the deep groundwater level at that water, at that model grade to be about 270 meters. And those are the boundary conditions we use. And still we do not let the water flow out of from here. It should go up to the transient zone and then go out of the watershed. And here comes the the model results. So this is the temporal variation of groundwater level, the deep groundwater level at all model grades from 2009 to 2012. And what I'm showing here is, it could be one of the most boring figures you see in the presentation, because nothing changes.
So, you know?
Nothing changes. Yes, that's what I'm trying to show. So the dynamics is really, really slow in deep groundwater because hydraulic connectivity is very, very slow. Very,
We
slow.
have data for this too, don't we? I mean, have you looked at the data?
For the connectivity, for the just
No,
the
for the groundwater depth, isn't that what this is?
yes, yeah, it doesn't match. It doesn't match. So in Pam's
That's
paper,
what you were talking about. You can look at the groundwater depth and model loss.
This is across the entire catchment, right? This is, did you say each line is a? I don't know.
one model grade. Yes. So we can, now I'm setting the boundary conditions to be 270 meters. It's constant, but we can make a seasonal variation with the boundary condition, then it will change. So that could be one of the reasons it doesn't change much, but we can apply the boundary conditions according to Pam's paper, how that changes. We can have a pseudo variation for the seasonal changes. And this is the shape of the deep groundwater. So this is the outlet from here, and this is the ridge top. And I'm averaging all those model grids along those different lines. So you can see this is the bottom of soil. There is a black line here. It's very close to this blue line, which is the transient interval. This is an average over 1 year. And the deep groundwater is around here. This is 270 meters. That is where we set the boundary condition. And at the outlet, it actually connects with the transient groundwater. But here it shows there is some difference. It's just because how we average the model grids, because the resolution is not fine enough, so it doesn't connect, but actually it connects. Water balance after adding this deep groundwater. We have discharge from surface and soil is about 430 millimeters, and discharge from bedrock, the upward groundwater flow, is about 10 millimeters, 1 centimeter. And bedrock infiltration is about 3.4 millimeters. That's really, really small in the model. And I think that underestimates compared to Pam's paper. But we didn't do anything. We didn't calibrate anything. We can actually change the hydraulic connectivity, so we can change a lot of things to make it larger. And there is deep groundwater inflow from the ridge top because we applied a constant boundary condition there, so water will go into the watershed through there. So 3.4, 7.1, that's about 10.6 in the model. So it balances itself in the deep groundwater zone. So adding a fractured bedrock layer as the representation of the deep groundwater. So now we can actually say we have groundwater in our model now. Yes. And yeah, so that's the point. So both groundwater zones are represented in this model. And the permanent interflow is still missing from the model because actually if we look at Pam's paper, I think she suggested there might be 3 different zones. but in our model, we are representing 2 of them. So that could be, or there may or may not be a problem here, because what we are simulating for the top soil layer is actually here. And in her paper, there is a permanent interflow zone. And in the model, what we are adding is this regional groundwater. So there are 3 layers of groundwaters in her paper, but we are representing this one and this one. We might be missing this one. Yes.
Doesn't your upper flow, what depth does it flow at?
That's about here. So the soil depth is about 3 meters at the deepest. So that's about this line.
So your upper flow is about 3 meters.
Yes, so we can actually increase the soil layer depth to include this part. Right, but still.
The second layer would also much lower than the top layer.
Yes, yes.
So that, like, I forgot, in her paper, when she talked about permanent interflow, like, what does permanent mean? Because interflow supposedly come and go, right?
Yes, yes, but this is, there is fast temporal variation in this zone. So it still is, it's like in between this, which doesn't change much, and this, which changes really fast. There is some seasonal variation in this permanent interflow.
That's just a freshwater table. In the shallow, that will be the first.
In the shallow
Did she
bedrock.
call it permanent interflow?
Yeah, that's
Did she call
permanent.
I can't remember why she wrote
Because it
that.
doesn't make.
Yeah, I don't know if I like that either.
Sense. Interflow mean it will go, like it wouldn't be like always there.
What do you think, Henry? In terms of the upper flow path? How many flow paths would you put in if you were to put in flow path?
Well, I think this impeding permanent, so-called permanent interflow is actually what I think is very important. I'm not sure it's permanent. It's.
So you think there's, but how many flow paths would you put up there?
I think it's good to add groundwater, but I think my focus has been on the upper, in this diagram, 2 layers. Yeah. The shallow soil and then soil and bedrock interface.
So you put 2 upper flow paths.
Yeah, I would tend to think that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it looked like when you were talking about permeability and porosity in the bedrock, you're mimicking cracks, right? Like that's how you're sort of permeability in the bedrock. And you're looking at the cracks as being leaky, so that's when you're getting.
No, I'm representing the whole bedrock, but I'm using the numbers for cracks in the soil.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
He's assuming the modes of permeability is fractions.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was just wondering how do you distribute this fraction around the bedrock?
Oh, it's uniform in the water jet.
Okay.
Yeah.
How bad is the assumption that all the water at the end of the watershed gets forced out in the stream? That sometimes really happen or never really happen?
Well, that's what we've been arguing about this whole.
Right.
We've changed our argument from whether we've got groundwater to like, how much it reduces that.
Right, but it's a small fraction, so I don't know whether we can observe that or not actually using this setup.
Proportion, like if you look at proportion going better to the stream versus let's say go down the bedrock vegetation, what's the proportion?
His is forced to go up into the stream. The
Right.
model
Yeah.
forces it to go to
Yeah.
the stream.
Yeah, but if Z1, for example, it doesn't go back, what is?
Right,
the
if you
proportion?
change the boundary condition up here.
1%, that's 10 millimeters. So it's
So if you
1%
change this
of-
boundary condition, then it would just go out this way.
If there is access for the groundwater, bedrock groundwater, whether it will improve the infiltration, the recharge. So, I mean,
What do you mean by
because for now-
improving?
For now, as a discharge part, the water groundwater will go up and bottom the system. That could be a business
That's right.
if we ignore that part and allow the water to go out of the system directly. Maybe that's recharge.
Yeah, it could be small. It could be larger. Yes. You're saying that this number could get larger, right? Because the resistance could get smaller. Right, but we don't know the boundary conditions, so we really can't say that. We don't know whether the resistance is larger or smaller than going on.
That's another question related to the boundary condition. Is that captured the bridge?
Yeah,
There
it's
should be any electric flow from the bridge. Yeah.
it's first order on the ground. I don't know what about at the subsurface.
So on that point, I guess back when they were doing the sprinkler experiments back in the 70s, there was observed increases in stream flow to the adjacent watershed. And so how sensitive would those numbers be if you change the boundary conditions to actually some water going out?
Yeah, I can't answer that question. I don't know the answer,
Okay.
right?
So did you look at Brad Kuntz and Comedy Singer's paper to get permeabilities or anything?
Yes,
You know
yes,
that
I
paper?
checked that. One of those numbers match them, but I can't remember which one, horizontal or vertical. One of the numbers they describe is really, really small. If you add
Because
that,
they also did a tracer study. Would you be able to use that tracer?
I don't know.
to
I can
constrain
take
your
a
model
look.
a little bit or something?
I can take a look and see if we can do that.
This
But they-
is water models, right? If you need your tracer, then you will be.
Well, no, but I mean, I'm thinking of a tracer study just as a mass balance kind of thing. You know what I mean? Not that you're going to be partitioning.
Yeah,
cells,
how
you're-
much?
It was a conservative volume. Is there also any way to use this model to help us constrain the Cheng's volume, right? You know, like this thing that we're worrying about where we know we're losing some water out the outlet in the subsurface. I'm wondering if we could use his model to constrain that to some extent. Obviously, we have to tell you everything we could possibly
At the
tell
subsurface,
you.
right? We have to know
And
that.
then you have to like, okay, the loss is only 2% or something.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
And then, you know, John had some idea that I didn't totally understand that had to do with water depths. So maybe there's.
Well, that was to help constrain ET in
Yeah,
Garner where
that's
you
right.
don't have that equivariance.
Right.
My impression, like from reading hydrography, like in the around stream, water tend to grow this way because this is an easier outlet than low temperature on the like rocks. Right, so like a lot of figures that I see in groundwater textbook are the stream, these kind of converted.
But if you look at Pam's paper, if you look at the watershed, Shale Hills and Plan View, depending on the season, you know, she was showing flow, you know, kind of along the axis of the watershed during one season, and then it went, you know, not perpendicular, but like 45 degrees to that another season. So I think in a high level watershed like this, zero order, I think you could lose water in the subsurface. Now, it may be such a small amount, it doesn't matter. I don't know.
I wonder if there's a relationship like you were saying, like in a first order steep watershed, the loss is small, but in a steep watershed, or open watersheds, the loss will be larger. Such a
Whether Shale Hills has to be groundwater. Can we find this groundwater loss?
I can't hear you. You started out strong.
I mean, at Shale Hills, can we see this phenomenon, the groundwater, the water from the watershed through groundwater, other than through the
I'm gonna have to think about it a little bit. I mean, the rocks in the subsurface of the outlet are pretty permeable. Looking at Google.
I think so too.
I definitely think we're losing some in the subsurface there. The question is just how much.
How much?
But we could think about that. I mean, there might be something we know that could constrain it. Well, are you done now?
Yes, I'm done.
This has been really pretty useful, I think. I feel like we have advanced quite a bit. think your stuff should help us constrain that. And I guess I am a little worried, you do need to figure out this thing with the new parameters for garner run based on soil moisture. You think about that.
Like the full local measurement. Yeah. That'll be like one. I didn't know.
Actually, I want to Cosmos knows, so I don't know an issue that you capture.
The whole
Actually, it's 1.4 points on very special.
Like get the Van Ganuken parameters for the whole watershed from the Cosmos.
But I'm just thinking that they are talking about the overall catchment response. So by using the Cosmos along with the stream discharge, it's better full catchment system rather than just one just or one position.
Ying was shaking his head.
Yeah, there is too much noise in Cosmos. It's not just soil, and we don't know actually which layer it represents. So it's better to have just point soil moisture measurements. Cosmos has so much noise. Dacheng has done this, so comparing Cosmos with local soil moisture, you can see the noises from, I don't know, maybe leaf water or just the humidity in the atmosphere, something like that. So we can't derive accurate soil parameters from Cosmos.
That's the other one. Compare Cosmos as constraint versus Exxon.
So we're gonna have to close it up, so Callum can't tell us his thoughts about scaling up, but he was thinking about them for the last hour, so that's.